Hello everyone, welcome to another one of my Leetcode videos. In this one we'll do Leetcode 2585, number of ways to earn points. This was part of today's weekly contest. So basically we're given an array of question types, right, where each element in the array represents the number of questions of that type and the number of points you can get by solving this question. So this means that there are 6 questions where you get 1 point, and then the second one, there are 3 questions where you can get 2 points, and then 2 questions where you can get 3 points, and so on. And you're given a target, right? So you're basically asked how many ways can we achieve these target points with these questions, right? So one way we can get 6 points is by solving all 6 questions of 1 point, right? That's one way to get 6 points. Another way is we can solve 4 of these and 1 of this, right? So that way we get 4 plus 2, 6, and so on. So we need to find how many ways can we solve these questions to get 6 points. And so what will be our approach to solve this problem? So basically, this is kind of like a number of possibilities, number of combinations way. And so, what comes to mind is when you think about these problems, it's either you're going to use like backtracking or dynamic programming, right? So we also know that like the n, the number of questions, and the target are relatively small numbers, right? 50 and 1,000, nothing too crazy. So this gives us a hint that we might be able to use some sort of dynamic programming, right? And if you look at the hint here, it also says use dynamic programming. So we just need to figure out like what will be our like recurrence equation. You can think of it as first we only consider this question type. We ignore the fact that there are other questions, right? So only given this question type, right? Like how many ways can we, if we find how many ways we can achieve the target 0 to 6, right? So if the target was 0, how many ways? If the target is 1, how many ways? If the target is 2, how many ways, and so on, right? So if we just consider this first question type, then we can compute how many ways there are to reach the target 0 to 6, right? And then we add the next question type. So then over here we have a few choices, right? Okay, first choice is we don't solve any of the questions. If we don't solve any of the questions, then the number of ways will basically be how many ways we could get 6 from the previous one, right? Then the second choice we have is, okay, what if we just solve one question, right? So basically, if we only solve one question from here, then we get 2 points. That choice can get us the target of 6 based on the number of ways there are to solve, get 4, right? Basically 6 minus 2, right? And then if we choose to solve 2 questions from here, how many ways can we get 6 minus 4, right? Because 2 questions will give us 4 points. So how many ways can we get 6 minus 4 in the previous one, and so on. So let me just draw this so you can visualize what I'm talking about. So basically here's our array, right? So this is basically the count, and this is the points that you can get. This is the count, this is the points, and so on, right? And so if we only had this question, right, this is our target, right? So how many ways are there we can get a target of 0? There's only one way, right? Basically you just don't solve anything, right? So 0, the answer for 0 will always be 1. There's always one way to get 0, which is just don't solve anything, right? Then how many ways can we get 1? Since each question is 1 point, right, there's one way to get 1. How many ways can we get 2? Since each question is 1 point, there's one way to get 1, or so to get 2, and so on, up to 6, right? And so if in this case, our target is 6, so we go until 6, right? But if let's say our target was 8, so 7 or 8, since we only have 6 questions, there are actually 0 ways to get 7 or 8, right? Because you can't get more than 6 points if you just had this question, right? So all of these ones below would be 0. Now once we have this populated, let's try to see how we can solve this by reusing the results over here, right? So we say, okay, how many ways can we get 0? It's 1. There's always one way you can get 0. Don't do anything. How many ways can you get 1, right? So in this case, you can't really solve any of the questions here to get 1, right? So the number of ways you can get 1, a target of 1, is basically what we had in the previous one, right? So if I don't solve any of the questions here, it will just be the previous target that I had over here. So this will just be 1, right? And then how many ways can I get 2, right? So if I don't solve any question, it will be the number of ways that I got 2 in the previous one, right? Or if I solve one question, right, that's 2 points, right, then it's going to be 2 minus 2, that will be 0 over here, right? So that means it's 1 plus 1. So there's 2 ways I can get to. Either I solve 0 questions or I solve 1 question, right? And then how many ways can I get 3, right? If the target was 3, again, I have the same choices. I can solve 0 questions, in which case it will be dp of 3, which is 1. I can solve 1 question. If I solve 1 question, I'll get 2 points. So then I have to fulfill a target of 1 with the previous question, which is there's one way to do that, right? And so I can't solve 2 questions because my target is only 3, so we'll stop there. And then in the case of 4, right, again, I can choose to solve, if my target is 4, I can choose to solve 0 questions, in which case it will be dp4 of the previous one, right? So there's one way I can do it if I choose to solve 0 questions. If I choose to solve 1 question here, then 4 minus 2, because I solved 1 question, is 2. So that means with the previous question, I have to get a target of 2, and there's one way to do that, right? And then I can also solve 2 questions because our target is 4. So 2 times 2 is still less than 4, right? So we can still solve 2 questions, and then the remaining will be 0. So how many ways are there to get 0 with the previous one? There's 1, right? So this pattern keeps going. So in general, right, we have basically our dp of I and t, right, where the I will go from 0 to the types dot length minus 1, right, because for each type we're computing this, and then the target will go from 0 to t, right, which is the number of the target here. So for each dpit will be basically equal to the summation, right? So you're going to, as you notice, each of them is a summation of dp of I minus 1, right? So it's we basically, each of these, notice we got them from the previous one, right? So it's dp of I minus 1 and of target, of the target, which is the capital T, our total target, minus, right, the current count times the current count, right? So this is like 0, 1, 2, right? So this is the number of questions we chose to solve of this type. So it's that I'll call that C, and that's going to be here from C equal to 0 to C equal to the minimum, right? So of the total C of I, so I'll call this C of I, which is how many questions of the type I do we have, right? So it's going to be we can't solve more than that, right? So you can't solve more than 2 questions if there's only 2. So it's either going to be you solve 2 questions, or basically whatever the target is, right? So in this case, if our target is 3, we can't really solve more than 1 question, right? Because we'd exceed 3. So it's going to be the target over the points of I, right? So whatever the minimum of these two is, that's how many questions we can sum, for this given index, right? So in this case, like our C of I, right, is 3. But then our T, which is the 4, this is the T that we're computing, that 4 over the points is 2, right? So we can only go from 0 to 2. We can't go to 3 because that'll be 6 points, and our target is only 4 for this index, right? So this is what this means. So basically, we'll sum it from t minus c. So c is the number of questions that we solve in this, this individual cell, times the number of points for that question, right? So times p of I. So this is basically going to be our dp equation. And note that each dp only depends on the previous one, right? So we just need to compute them in order from left to right so that we can have the previous one ready. And then at the end, our answer will be dp of types.length minus 1 and t, right? So that's how, using all the questions, how many ways can you get target, right? And then notice that for dp0, we don't have a 0 minus 1, right? So for dp0, we'll just assume that the previous one, which was dp like -1, is all, there's one way to get 0, right? Because you can get 0 for sure. But we'll just assume that for all others, there's like 0 ways to get it, right? So when we set up our array, we'll just have our 0th index be this imaginary one over here, just so we can write consistent code. And then every time we get I, we'll just do I plus 1 to index it in the dp array, right? And notice that at the end, when we get to the last one, we don't really need to compute 0 to 5, right? Because we're only interested in the t, and the t only depends on the previous ones, right? So we don't really need 0 to 5 computed or 0 to target minus 1 computed for the last one. So for the last one, we'll just only compute this. So basically our dp array, index 0 will be this like -1 imaginary position over here. And then from, we'll have 0 to the length minus 1 be equal to, all the positions up to the second last one. Or sorry, this will be 1 to length minus 1 will be all these positions up to the second last one. And then at the end, we'll just compute only this one using the same equation. So yeah, hopefully this made sense. Let's go ahead and write the code and see how that looks like. So we'll start by initializing our dp array. So here's our dp array. Remember, we want types.length and target plus 1. So now, dp00 will be equal to 1, right? Because remember we said there's one way to get 0 in this imaginary spot. And then what we'll do is we'll loop through from I equal to 0 to I equal to types.length minus 1. Remember, because we only need to go to the second last one, because for the last one we'll have some special logic because we just need the teeth position, right? And so actually this will be types.length, yeah, minus 1, because this will take us to the second last one, right? And then what we want to do over here is we'll say we'll loop through from t equal to 0 up to the target, right? So we'll say, or actually t equals to 1 to the target, right? So that this is basically looping through these positions for each of our indices. And so for each of these, what we'll do is basically compute the dp of I and t, right? But remember, in our dp array, we decided the first one is imaginary and the actual 0th index start from the next one. So we'll say dp I plus 1 t, right? And that will be equal to this quantity over here. So we're going to basically do a summation from c equals 0 to c equals this. So let's go ahead and set up that loop. So it's going to be for int c is equal to 0, which means I chose to solve 0 questions, right? C is, so basically the capital C, which is, I'll call it C sub this quantity over here. So maybe I'll just call it C end, is equal to the minimum, right? So the minimum of C of I, so like how many questions there are of this type, right? So that's just going to be types I0, that's how many questions of this type we have, and T over points of I, right? So that's going to be our T, which is the current target that we're calculating for. Oh, and one more thing here, we need to set I plus 1, 0 to 1, right? Because for getting a target of 0, there's always one way, and then this one loops through, to get I plus 1t. So anyway, going back, the C end will be types I0 and T, the minimum of that, and T over points of I, which is going to be types I1, right? So that's going to be our C end. So we'll say for C equals 0, C less than C end, C plus plus. And then for each of that, what we'll do is we'll add dpi plus 1t is equal to, this quantity over here. So it's going to be the dpi, which is the previous one, of t minus c times the points, right? So basically, how many of the current type of questions we chose to solve times how many points each one is, and that goes up to t. And so this C end makes sure that this will never be negative, right? So we just add, since it's a summation, we add the previous value of this to this, and note that we have to return it mod 10 to the 9 plus 7. So I'm just going to do a mod over here, right? So this will calculate that, and at the end, what we want to do is only run this formula for the last row. Copy this one, and we'll have, okay, so our C end for that last row will be the minimum of types of I, which will be basically, so I'll just calculate the I here to be types.length minus 1, which is basically going to be the last question, right? And so we'll say the C end is the minimum of how many of those questions there are, and T, so instead of T, it's just going to be target, right? Because now we're just going to compute the final target over, the points of that, right? And so now we go from 0 to C end, and then we'll say dp I plus 1t, but we won't have this in our dp, remember, because we only allocated space to the second last one. So actually we can just go ahead and do plus 1, so we allocate space for the last one too. And so then this won't fail, right? So this will be that equals to the existing one, and we should just set this one to target instead of t, because we're no longer looping through everything. Yes, and this will serve then as the previous or the second last one in the dp array, right? And so I think this should do it. So at the end, we should just return dpi plus 1 target, right? So let's go ahead and run that and see how this does. All right, accepted. Let's submit. Perfect, 100% solution in both time and space. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.